Hey, let's talk a little bit about the mystery of my God search. Hi, this is Michael Shevack, and welcome to Godsearch. By the way, thanks so much for allowing me to take a week off. I didn't record it in advance, and I was a little worried that if I took a week off, I'd lose consistency, but it worked out pretty well. So thank you very, very much. I had a long, nice week of vacation. It's the first week in 76 episodes of God Search I ever took off, and I thank you so much for allowing that. This particular God Search, I feel moved to share a little bit of the formative experience that I believe propelled my God search. Now, we're always on a God search. If you're alive, you know that if you've been watching God search all along. I say if you're alive, you're already on a God search. But there was one particular thing that I feel I stumbled into that propelled me faster. It was a turbocharger, and that was meditation. Particularly, it was the old, well, not old, I'm not being unkind, but relative to my age, it was late 1960s, and I got involved in transcendental meditation, which was introduced to the world through Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he has the great fame of being the guru's beetle and all that kind of stuff. Um, I got involved in that. I was 16 and a half, 17 years old. I was in college, and I passed a sign outside the cafeteria, and it said something about hearing the levels of a sound on different, vibratory levels of a sound. And I did not know they were talking about a sound which they called a mantra. And anyway, it was an introductory lecture to transcendental meditation. And I was very, very curious about it for some reason. And when I say for some reason, is that the mystery of the human soul, as I've come to understand it, is that sometimes you're drawn to something, and sometimes you can be passing the wall that's by the cafeteria where that sign is. And it's hard to know whether the sign pulled you towards it or you found the sign because of an impulse in you. I think that both is going on. This is a very, very mysterious universe. Anyway, it had come into my life at a certain unusual point. I had decided that I was in need of therapy, and I did not fit in to reality at all. And I was very, very uncomfortable with how this world was. I just didn't know where I fit in. And I found myself a very, very good therapist. And I had had a formative experience where I noticed in the course of therapy that when I changed on the inside, that reality changed on the outside. If I changed my emotional relationship, let's say with my father or my mother, parallel things took place outside me where people who were similar to my mother or similar to my father, I'm using that as an example, they changed and my outer relationships changed because my inner relationships changed. Now, when that happened, I said to my therapist, I said, I'm noticing this takes place. I'm noticing this takes place. That when I'm changing with you, the world is changing and adjusting to me. And he said, you've noticed. Good. Now you're ready to learn the secret of the universe. I mean, I'm game. I'm on a God search. Hey, teach me the secret of the universe. And he said, your purpose in life is to grow. You will either grow willingly, in which case things will go smoother and you'll have more fun and it will be easier, or you will fight growing. You'll put up your dukes. You'll resist it, in which case you're going to grow anyway, but you're going to suffer more. So your choice is either to grow willingly, evolve willingly, or grow resisting, grow not willingly, and suffer more. There was no real choice. At that moment in time, I chose to embrace growth as the only real sense of God that I could have. Intellectually, I couldn't go anywhere else, but I could embrace growth in a positive way. It was after that experience that I was drawn curiously to a wall by the cafeteria in my college, and they had that sign for an introductory class to transcendental meditation. I begged my parents for, at that time, $66 to do it. They were very frightened because it was an alien custom. We came from a more provincial Jewish family, and it was a frightening thing. That was a very frightening time for parents. You know, kids were growing their hair long and they were doing drugs and playing with all sorts of avant-garde ideas and using their bodies in ways that were at that time a little inappropriate. And they were frightened. But, you know, they gave me the money for it and I did it. Now, I just want to say that I don't like to recommend any particular spiritual discipline to anyone because I've come to the conclusion in my ripe old age. I mean, I'm going to be 73 next next month. That's pretty cool. But I don't like to recommend anything to anyone because I believe everyone has their own God search and they find their own path. But I do want to tell you that my experience with transcendental meditation was truly transformative. After the initial insight of the purpose of growth, entry into the mystery of meditation, or rather, a level of consciousness to which I had been blind prior, propelled me towards experiences which were utterly inexplicable by the standard kinds of rational thinking that I had taken to be normal. Very, very quickly after meditating, I began to notice on a more regular basis that kind of strange synchronization between my inner world and my outer world. I noticed it happening more often. I noticed it happening when I was sleeping, that I would have dreams that correlated to events the next day. I noticed it when I was awake, and that if that in the very instant that I was thinking something, there would be reflections back to me from other people or other events in uncanny ways. You know, it's one of my gifts is that I'm very hyper aware of patterns and I'm very aware of symbols. And I saw this intricate reflectiveness between myself and the world outside of me. They were scintillating. The outer experience was changing me inwardly, and the inner experience was reflected outwardly. And those experiences were changing. There was a sense of a kind of self-referential consciousness where everything was a piece of the puzzle. And, you know, I found out that in the transcendental meditation movement, they have a term for that. and they call it cosmic consciousness, where everything is kind of like, a fractal, to use the mathematical term, a fractal component of an entire unity. Well, I was really amazed because even though I had been promised such an experience, I am very skeptical. And in fact, the experience turned out to be very real, and it even got deeper and deeper over the years. One of the things that I committed to, and many people are curious about my God search, is I committed to following this program of meditation because, if it was going to work, it was going to work. So I decided to give it my life, which I did. I didn't do anything elaborate. I didn't get involved with the movement. I tried maybe one or two advanced classes just to see what they were like, but I was not interested. I stayed basically with the same exact meditation technique that I had when I was 16 and a half years old. And nothing, but over the years, the depth of experience that has come out of the transcendental meditation technique has been just overwhelmingly miraculous. Over the years, what started as a kind of amplification of my experience in therapy, where there was intimate correlations between different levels of life, outwardly and inwardly, and that my rational mechanism for computing slowly ceased to be separated. In other words, it was no longer disjunct. It it wasn't just in the world doing computations. I began to notice that this kind of what they called cosmic consciousness began to connect like two gears to my normal rational material thinking process. So I began to notice that I was thinking in a way that had a kind of inspiration to it. I noticed that I was thinking differently, that thoughts were coming to me and they weren't the exact same thoughts, and the processes and my logical processes weren't the same. I was very fortunate having been in therapy, and I had a classic therapist at that time. So self-awareness and self-observation and objectivity was very, very much a part of the initial therapy. So my mind became very trained and I was able to self-observe myself. So I noticed that my thinking process began to alter. I also noticed that my thinking process became more powerful and I would achieve this what I was doing with a lot less work. It was really, really remarkable to see this, and it was really a short period of time. I began to notice the initial changes after I had begun meditating. Later on, I I it was a very peculiar thing. I was drawn to experimenting with all sorts of religions. I had been raised Jewish, but I was raised Jewish in an ethnic way. I had no relationship to anything that you would call divinity. I was an atheist and extremely skeptical about religious promises. Nonetheless, something in me, upon tasting this mystery that was amplified by the meditation experience, drew me to experimenting with many different religions. At that time, there were Hare Krishnas. I learned how to chant that, and Buddhists, and there was a whole movement for self-awareness in Esalen Institute out in California. I'm really dating myself. And of course, there was at that time, which I did not get involved in, a lot of heavy duty drug experimentation, which I did not do. It just is, something that bypassed me. Later on, I tried a little bit, but it did not mix well with me. And the experience deepened, and I was drawn to yoga. Now that was really an amazing thing, and I met a teacher who had studied under BKS Iyengar, who at that time was probably the world's most famous yogi. He had introduced yoga on a large scale to Yehudi Menuhin, and that became a very popular movement. And all of a sudden, the consciousness that had been opened up through the transcendental meditation, I was drawn into a kind of yoga. And the yoga that I was taught was a kind of idealistic yoga. It very much required perfection of the form of the yoga. It was not concentrated on breathing. It curiously was a form-centered yoga. I didn't understand why, but that's what I was sent to, and I didn't understand its meaning until years later. Over time, the spiritual experience deepened even more, and I began to notice correlations where I could begin to interpret the events that were taking place in my life and kind of understand what life was teaching me. I would have a series of events, and it was as if these events were speaking to me and teaching me what it is I needed to do, where I needed to go, who I needed to speak to. My life became filled with what you might call signs. It's as if I had a personal relationship with divinity or with the universe, whatever you want to call it. And that sense of a directedness where the mystery that was around me was not just correlating, and I wasn't just seeing, the inner world and the outer world dancing off of each other, but there was a sense now that there was something behind me that was taking me and moving me forward, and I could understand the language of my life. My life was being directed in a way that had a language. The simple experience of finding the sign to call me to try the transcendental meditation. Well, that was a very early stage of being aware of a sign. I can look back on it now and know that. But back then I didn't. But as I continued the experience over the years of meditating, the spiritual experience opened up so that what was called cosmic consciousness became something that I've heard that's called God consciousness, where you have a kind of awareness of life speaking to you and a sense of the meaning. It was an amazing thing. What was more amazing is while this is all going on, my life is completely radically changing. I was a medical student and I gave that up, and I got involved in the meditation and the yoga, and I came back. I was actually going to medical school in Mexico, which was one of the better things that ever happened to me because I had a chance as a boy from Queens to be surrounded by mountains and sky and incredible sense of beauty, which I didn't have growing up. And it opened me up further. And, somehow it's a very long story, but I wound up leaving medical school and becoming an advertising creative director on Madison Avenue. You may know the campaign Gillette, The Best a Man Can Get. I wrote that. Anyway, years later, the depth of this kind of initiation into transcendental meditation became even more pronounced. at a certain point in my life, I had gotten fired from a position. And it was a very frightening thing because my ego got smashed. And I tend to have a very, big ego. I'm a Leo. And the next day in my home, a newspaper arrived. And it said that a new rabbi had come into town. And what was curious is that he was Italian. He was born in Italy. He had been educated in New Orleans, Louisiana, and he had just come back from Dallas, Texas. Now, my wife, Teddy, she is Italian. She was born and educated in New Orleans, Louisiana, and our son from her first marriage had just come back from Dallas, where he had been visiting his father. Now, the mathematical probability of 3 God consciousness signs like that taking place is non-existent. I mean, how do you have a wife who's Italian, New Orleans, and Dallas, and this rabbi is Italian, New Orleans, and Dallas? And I said to Teddy, look, dress the kids. We're going to the synagogue. The guy's been sent by God. Well, her response was hardly kind. She said, you're out of your mind. You can fill in the blank. And I said, yeah, I am. Dress the kids. Now, here's the mystery of the mysteries of the mysteries. And I'm going to abbreviate the whole thing so we don't take up, all of Godsearch. It turns out that we began to become collaborators on a couple of books. And it turns out that he was Rabbi Jack Bemperad. He's a very, very esteemed and well-known rabbi who has dealt with interreligious dialogue all around the world. He's helped negotiate the recognition of the State of Israel by the Vatican, and a lot of the healing work between the church and the people of Israel, as well as Islam. And he took a liking to me, and I'm going to abbreviate it. But one day I challenged him. I said, give me one book that makes any of this Jewish stuff make sense. And he handed me this massive book. But I did not know that that was the beginning of actually finding a teacher in my own tradition. Well, here's the strangeness. It turns out that in 1971, Rabbi Ben-Parad received 1971, received a spirituality award directly given to him by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. It's even stranger. His teacher, who also became my teacher, may he rest in peace, was Professor Ellis Rifkin, who was the Alfred S. Oakes Professor Emeritus of History at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Well, he was a full-time meditator. My rabbi was a full-time meditator. Well, I did not know that they were going to become teachers, my teachers, and they would set up a rabbinic council for the purpose of a private ordination for me. And I did not know any of this. But what is very curious is that I was sent at the right time after I had been married and had an income, and I was all stable on nice earthly things. I was sent to what, if you were Hindu, you might call a dharma, or a tradition of Orthodox Jewish rabbis who had become modern. They were both Orthodox raised. They had become modern, and they had both become full-time transcendental meditators. It's an astonishing experience. There was actually a spiritual lineage that God, a universe, whatever you want to call it, I was sent through the mystery of life to an actual lineage of Orthodox Jewish rabbis who had become contemporary modern rabbis and top of the game, and they were meditators. I was sent in a lineage. This is, if you don't believe in God, you'd better have a dumber idea. But you can see what happened was from the time had my fundamental insight into growth and evolution in my therapist's office, then the TM sign at the cafeteria, talk about food right outside the cafeteria, then meditating in nature in Mexico, discovering yoga, finding a career, which, by the way, in itself is an amazing religious story. Then I'm finding a lineage of two of the core rabbis. There were many others involved that saw to my education, and they were all funneled by the TM experience, which turbocharged my incredible growth. It was remarkable. So what I want to say to everyone here is, look, there are many forms of meditation out there. I've tried many, okay? And I'm not recommending one over the other because who you are and what your soul requires, I'm not going to tell you. But I am going to tell you that the transcendental meditation technique was an extraordinary turbocharger to my personal life, and that the events around it were so mysterious and so beyond the ability of my ordinary mind to frame that I did not have a choice but to expand. My life experiences became so amplified. Whatever was in me as a child, and they all said I was a little strange, whatever was in me was opened up to a very wide extent, and I was sent in the direction that I needed to be. I did not know that I would be doing interreligious dialogue around the world. I did not even know even that I would be shooting a Gillette commercial in Italy right by the Vatican and later on be applauded in the University of Milan in Italian for writing that jingle. I mean, I did not know. Everything began to be one unusually choreographed and beautiful life that kind of, was an offering to existence. It became really a coordinated and coherent movement. Years later, the most astonishing experience took place. I had actually been at Maharishi's University in Iowa, and I had been talking to someone about what would happen when Maharishi passed, and they told me that there were meditating monks and pandits they called it, in a place called Uttarakanshi. Now, that knocked the air right out of me. I started shaking. Why? Well, because 5 years prior to that, I was on a beach in New Jersey with my wife, and I heard a voice that was speaking some kind of funny language, and I didn't know what it was. And I wrote down the message phonetically, and I didn't know what it was, but I said to Teddy, I said, I have a feeling this may be Hindu. So on Monday, I went and asked one of my friends what it was, and she said, no, this is not Hindu. I said, well, what is it? She says, I have no idea. And then she introduced me to one of her friends who was a student of Satchidananda, no, oh, I forgot his, of, I forgot the name of the guru. Please forgive me. Um, and she asked me to speak to him, and he looked at it and he says, "Oh, this is not Hindu, this is Sanskrit." I had gotten a message on the beach in Sanskrit. Sanskrit's the oldest language in the world. I didn't know Sanskrit. I never studied Sanskrit. And the message was a very peculiar message. It talked about, "O moon-pointed one, a master of the Rig Veda in Uttarkashi," in which it turns out that Uttarkashi is some kind of province in India, that these meditating pandits were in there, and they were studying also the Rig Veda, which is a Hindu scripture. And that message came through 5 years before I had even learned that there were going to be, TM meditating priests in a province called Uttarkashi. And I found out at the same time at the TM University that Uttarkashi was where Maharishi's teacher, Guru Dev, came from, and where Maharishi spent a vow of silence for a year in honor of the passing of his teacher. So all I'm telling you is this very strange mystery of how, after discovering the power of growth and embracing growth and evolution, I was introduced at 16 and a half to this little tiny mantra, and it began opening my mind up past the mechanics of thought, the machinery of thought, to a place beyond thought, which was the kind of source and connected me to kind of what some people would call the divine mind. Some Maharishi calls it being. These are all very, very difficult words, especially for me, because I've been trained in philosophy, and there's the word being is a problem. All senses clear. Leave that all alone. Nonetheless, the net was, whoever I was at that tender age became jettisoned to something larger than I had never imagined that I could possibly be. Now, there are a lot of people out there, and go to yourgodsearch.com, please, and tell me about your stories, because everyone has a fascinating story on Godsearch, because their lives are fascinating. But there are a lot of people out there who are suffering, and because their minds are conflicting with each other. They have different people on the inside of them. They're not necessarily schizophrenic. They have different ego states, different aspects of them that bang into each other. And many of them have to use medication. Well, I got to tell you, that's good. It will help. It will help them. That's great. But medication's great, but meditation is also great. So if you're out there and you're suffering because of all of these conflicts on the inside of you, intellectually or emotionally, consider meditation. If you're on a God search, which you already are because you're alive, the meditation will help heal these conflicts and open up another level of consciousness that has often been talked about, which is called unity consciousness. There was cosmic consciousness and God consciousness. There's also another consciousness that I'm enjoying increasingly at my ripe old age, which is a sublime sense of perfect unity that happens every single moment, and also the infinite synchronization that happens in cosmic consciousness, as well as a sense of being guided and understanding the meaning of the events that take place. The meditation experience is profound. It won't affect you like it affects me. Everyone is completely different. Everyone is a seed that contains new knowledge that will blossom a certain way. I'm not telling you that it is the doorway to your, total mysticism. Its purpose is to just help you relax and open up and flower to fulfill the potential you are. Well, it did that for me. I don't, like to recommend something to someone else. I'm not telling you what to do, but I just wanted to share that particular curiosity of finding that mantra through transcendental meditation was transformative right down to meeting my particular religious teachers, finding the understanding of the mysteries of spirituality that were in the religion of my birth, because I had not been involved in the religion of my birth, seeing the mystery of my God search and discovering it as an adult, you know, seeing it clearly as an adult, not just a child who's conditioned, was an extraordinary thing. And it gives me the ability to explain things to people that other people can't, because I was not conditioned to be Jewish. I was not conditioned to be a rabbi. I learned it because of a spiritual awakening, and I was sent in a certain direction for a certain education. And also to be understanding of the mysteries of how I might know about a lineage of tradition that was happening in someone else's religion, and learn about that 5 years before I actually confirmed that it had any meaning. I didn't know what Uttrakasha was, or a moon pointed one. I didn't even know what the Rig Veda was. I had never read it. Um, these things lead one to believe that, meditation, it's a simple, innocent technique for sure, but it can open the doors to great, incredible mysteries and depths of human awareness and consciousness. And I got to tell you, we're in 2026 and we need that. So if you're out there and you're a spiritual adventurer and you want to speed up your God search and you want to turbocharge your God search, call your local Transcendental Meditation Center, check them out. There are also other forms of meditations out there that may be better suited to who you are. I'm not telling you what to do. I just said this technique worked really well for how I am. And hey, turbocharge your God search. This is Michael Shevack. Thank you for being here. Uncover God, discover God, and recover the innate spirituality that is inside every single person. It is waiting there to be opened up and explored. Transcendental meditation helped me, might help you. There are other things, and explore the mystery that's in life and even in the religion of your birth. You might be very surprised it wasn't an accident that you were born, and you weren't born into the wrong family either. God bless. See you next week. Oh, Wednesday's about 5:45 Eastern Daytime. Uh, Thanks for coming to God Search. Keep on searching. Bye-bye.